So I've had a few of you reach out to me and ask me to do a video on how I process my galaxy images within Siril. That's what this video is about. Just so you know, it's not that much different than any other object that I process using Siril. The only difference is within the generalized hyperbolic stretch, there is a setting that I changed to help pull out the colors of the galaxy versus taking it into Photoshop and trying to lift all those levels and get the balance that I'm looking for. I guess you can consider this video kind of an intermediate level. So if you're just starting with Siril, make sure you watch my beginner's tutorial first before you jump into this, because I'm not going to cover how to install the software or how to stack the image. We're going to start with a stacked image right out of Siril. And part of my workflow nowadays is also using GraXpert. I've been using it for a while, especially since they have the AI version of background extraction, and that works fantastic for me. And now that they have denoise built into it, I've been using that as well. There is some quirks with it. It doesn't affect the data, but it affects the screen stretch or auto stretch preview that we see in Siril. We'll go over all that in the video, but I'm really curious to see if anybody else is seeing the same results and if you figured out what's causing it and why it's happening. So if you know, shoot me a comment. I'd really appreciate it. So we'll get through this, like I said, from the stacked image all the way through to touching things up in Photoshop at the end. My name is Rich, and you're watching Deep Space Astro. Okay, so like I mentioned, we're not going through how to stack, right? You guys know how to do that if you're watching this video. So we're going to start right after the stack. So there's my result fit file right out of Siril using the OSC pre-processing script. Before we do any kind of processing in Siril, we're going to use GraXpert to do background extraction and also to denoise the image using the new AI features. So just going to run GraXpert. Current version right now as of time of recording is 3.0.2. You'll also want to come over to your advanced tab that your AI models are set to the latest. So 1.0.1 for the background extraction and 3.0.2 for the denoising. First step, load up the image. There's our stack out of Siril. And what I generally like to do, you can see the stacking artifacts at just a 15% stretch. This is just a screen stretch, so it's just a preview of your image. I'll take that all the way up to 30% just to make sure I can see everything that's going on around the edges. Sometimes the stacking artifacts can be so faint that you may miss them during the cropping, which is our next step here. So 30% just to get through the crop. We're going to grab the corners and just crop in so we get all the stacking artifacts out of the way. Come over and hit apply crop. And then I'll drop back down to a 15% stretch just so it's not aggressive for the next couple steps. Our next step is background extraction. So click on the plus button. I use the AI model nowadays. If yours doesn't say AI, just click on the button and you'll see the 4 choices that you have. The other 3, you'll have to manually put down your sample points, which is fine if that's what you want to do, but the AI stuff has been working very well for me. Your smoothing parameters, there's not a lot of a gradient going on here. It's somewhat smooth across the image, so I'm going to leave it over on 1. If you have more pronounced gradients, hard edges for lack of a better term, then you probably want to start sliding your smoothing down towards the left. Again, you'll have to play with it and see what gives you your best results. But for this image, I know 1's going to work out good. So I'm just going to hit calculate background. Once it's finished, up on top, you see it says gradient corrected. So if we wanted to preview it, we can go back to our original and then back to the gradient corrected. And then there's also the background option, which shows you the gradients that it actually removed from the image for you. So we're going to go back to gradient corrected. And now we're going to jump over to denoising. So hit the plus button next to denoising. And you can play with your denoise strength, right? Generally at least 0.7. Again, it depends on your data, how much noise is actually in it. I know from running through this, I generally leave it at about 0.9 to 1. For this image, I'm going to go all the way up and just hit denoise image. Denoising takes a few minutes depending on the processing speed of your computer. If this is your first time running denoise, it'll prompt you to download the AI model if you haven't done so previously. So if it's the first time you're running it, it'll prompt you to download that. Go ahead and let it do it, and then it'll jump right into the denoising function itself. All right, so denoising has completed. Again, we can come up top here and we can go back over to our gradient correct. So we can take a look at the before and after. So there is the before. And if we come back to the denoise, there's the after. So at this point, we're going to come over to our saving option, hit the plus button, 32-bit fits. We're going to say save process, and it'll default appending underscore GraXpert to the file name, which is fine for me. So I'm just going to hit save. Now, there is something strange with what GraXpert does during the denoising, and I haven't quite put my finger on it. And if anybody knows, let me know in the comment, because it's really been driving me crazy. This is what you would expect to see in the saved image when you open it up in Siril, right? So if we come over to Siril and we open up that GraXpert file that we just saved, and then go down and take it out of linear view and go into auto stretch, it is what appears to be extremely overstretched. And this is just a preview, right? It's not stretching the image at all for us, but it's not what I expected. I would expect it to look like this, right? The way we saved it out of there. What's interesting is the same thing happens in PixInsight. If I was to open this up in PixInsight, I have a very similar overstretched view. What is really interesting is if I come back over to GraXpert and go back into my loading option and hit load image, and open up that same file that we have open right now, we get the same result within GraXpert as well. So I don't know why it does this. It doesn't cause an issue. It hasn't modified the data as far as I can tell. At least it's not doing any stretching or anything like that. But it also messes up with my deconvolution process as well. And we'll get to that point here in a few minutes. But I just want to make you guys aware of it and ask if anybody knows why this is happening. Am I doing something wrong, or is there another way of going through all this stuff? So that aside, I was kind of like a little sidebar here. So we're done with GraXpert, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. We have the processed image from GraXpert opened up in Siril, and the next thing we're going to do is some color calibration. So we're going to go into our color calibration and do the photometric color calibration. All I need to do at this point is hit OK for it to color correct it and flip it if it needs to be flipped. Now, that's the other thing. With the way this comes out, apparently too overstretched in the preview, you really don't get to see the color change too much because it's kind of blown out. So you just have to kind of trust the process at this point, because everything's okay. It's just really overstretched at this point, for lack of a better term. Don't even know if that's what's happening. But anyway, so we're gonna hit the close button, and then just like always, we're gonna come up and we're gonna do some SCNR. So that's our remove green noise. Default setting, just click apply. Now we're gonna move into the deconvolution. So I'm gonna come over into my menu, image information, and then my dynamic PSF. Now you can also bring up the dynamic PSF dialog box over here under image processing and the star processing menu, and this little gear icon will take you to the same place. So whichever is faster for you, it doesn't matter, it's the same thing. So in preparation for deconvolution, I like to give it an amplitude range to build my PSF preview from. If I was to just hit the detect stars button right now, you'll see it'll detect all the stars in the image for the most part. Maybe it skips over some really faint ones, but that's fine. We don't want those for deconvolution anyways. But right now it's detected 696 stars. I want to limit that down. So I took amplitude range, and in the minimum box, I put 0.1, and in the maximum, we do 0.7. And, you know, play with these numbers too. If they're not working out for you, then adjust them one way or the other. But what this is saying is only detect the stars that are brighter than 0.1 and dimmer than 0.7, right? So nothing over 0.7 and nothing under 0.1. And then hit your detect stars button again. You'll see 696 just drop down to 12. So this is what we're going to use to generate our PSF preview. So back up to the image processing menu, and then into deconvolution. We want to select PSF from stars, which is telling the deconvolution tool to reference what we've just selected over here in the dynamic PSF dialog box, and then just hit generate PSF. There's our preview based on the stars that it's selected. You'll notice that the star is going outside the boundaries of the preview box. So we don't want that. It needs to be contained within the box. So our PSF size needs to be increased. So I'll just hit that up a couple times from 15 to 19. Again, select PSF from stars, and then generate PSF. It's getting better, but it's not perfect yet. We're still touching the edges. So I'm going to take that up to 23, PSF from stars, and then generate. And that's what we're looking for. Maybe just one more. Get a little bit closer inside of that box. So you want to see the whole star in the preview box itself. Once you have that, you can start with the default settings, but again, whatever GraXpert is doing during the denoise sequence really blows these out of the water. But I'm going to leave them on the default settings just so you guys can see it. This can take a few minutes. If I was to hit apply right now, it's going to apply the deconvolution to all the stars in the image to speed the process up a little bit. What I usually do is draw a selection box somewhere in the middle. and then right click and crop, and I'll run the deconvolution on this cropped image. I do that because it'll run faster, and I just do that as I'm trying to figure out which settings that I want to use. Once I'm happy with my settings, then I'll undo the crop and then apply the deconvolution to the entire image. So again, we're going to leave these on a default so you guys can see how messed up this is going to look because of what GraXpert did. And then I'll show you the settings that you need to adjust to get the results that you want. So we'll go ahead and apply. It'll still take a minute for this to get done. So we'll skip through this and come back when it's finished with its first pass. All right, so it's finished the deconvolution of the crop part of the image, and you can see what I'm talking about. This is just a mess all the way around the galaxy. The galaxy looks okay, but everything on the outside is just horrible. I, again, don't know what GraXpert is doing that causes this, but we can correct this and get the stars tightened up the way that we want to. So I'm going to hit the undo button to get me back to my original image, and we're going to start with the iterations. I'm taking the iterations all the way down to 1, leaving the gradient descent step size to the 0.0003, and then hitting apply. And this will get me the starting point that I'm looking for, and then we can adjust from there. So first pass is complete. As you can see, it didn't mess up all the stuff around the galaxy like it did on the first pass with the 10 iterations. So the takeaway is play with your iterations, right? Maybe you can get away with 2 or 3. Again, probably depends on the data. I found that 1 worked for this image well. And just to show you, if you keep an eye on the stars, if I undo the deconvolution, you can see how they blurred a little bit more. If I redo it, it takes them back down just a little bit. Now, what I generally do is just play with the gradient descent step size, right? We're at the 0003 right now. I'll take it up to 4, undo the last deconvolution, so I'm starting from scratch again, and then hit apply. See what it looks like at the next setting up. What you're watching for is ringing around the stars. So if I undo this, again, watching the stars, and redo it, you can see the before and after, and that doesn't look too bad. There is a little bit of ringing going on, and I'll show you. Let's undo it, and we'll take it up to the next step at 0.0005 and hit apply, and we'll probably see the ringing really pronounced in here. So, and we do the dark shadowing around there. So that's what I usually do. I'll take it up as high as I can until I see the ringing occurring, and then I'll start working backwards and dropping back down. That finds that nice balance. So even at 4, we had a little bit. So in this case, I think 3 is going to do well for us. So we'll put it back to 3, and yeah, it does. So again, we cropped this image, right, just so the whole deconvolution process would run faster for us while we're trying to determine which settings to use. So I'm going to go back one more undo to get rid of my crop and get me back to my original image. My settings that I just tested are still in place. So now I'll hit apply once more so that deconvolution is applied to the entire image. All right, so deconvolution has now been applied to the entire image. So we can close the decon dialog as well as our dynamic PSF dialog. Next thing that I do is remove the stars so I can just work on the galaxy itself. So up in image processing and then StarNet star removal. We're still linear, so we need to tick pre-stretch linear image for the tool to properly remove the stars. Make sure generate star mask is on, and then hit execute. All right, stars are removed. We're still in our auto stretch, so we're gonna go back into linear mode and begin our stretching. So we're gonna use the generalized hyperbolic stretch transformation to do this under image processing. So this is the step that I mentioned in the beginning of the video where I changed just a single setting to help me bring out the colors in the galaxy. Just like always, I start with my local stretch intensity pretty high. If this was a nebula, that's how I would start it, and I just want to show you the differences between the two methods that I'm talking about using here. If I start bringing up my stretch, you'll see the galaxy, right? But it's really muted, right? Almost just a bunch of grays and stuff. You can see small hints of color in there. But what I found, and similar to how we stretched the stars back in, if you've seen my StarNet video, if we change the color stretch model to either human weighted or even weighted, it preserves the colors in the stars, and it does the same thing for the galaxy. So if I just hit human weighted, you can see the color just pop just by simply changing the color stretch model. Human and even both work pretty much the same way, but take a look at each of them, see which works well for you. I'm gonna leave it on even weighted. And then my first initial stretch is always pretty aggressive, as you can see. The further to the right you take it, the more you're gonna see what's in the image. I'll take it over pretty far. It allows me to see the edges of the galaxy here, right? And then I start backing it back down to bring the background back under control, but not so much that I'm starting to lose detail around the edge of the galaxy. So it's just a little bit at a time, starting from the high end, working back down low. And once I'm happy with what it looks like, I'll hit the apply button. And you can see in the histogram here, if I zoom up just a little bit, we've got a little bit of a gap between where the data starts and the left-hand side of the window. So under the type of stretch, change that to linear stretch, and keeping an eye on that space right there, I'll just bring that black point over just to put the image where the data is starting. Keep an eye on your clipping. 0.02 isn't bad. I generally try to keep that at 0 though. Just use your little plus and minus buttons to get really granular with it. 0, so I'm not clipping any data over on the dark side of everything. And then click apply. Now back over to generalized hyperbolic transform. You can leave your color stretch model to even weighted if you want. Again, play with these things. See what works best for your data or your taste and what you want your image to look like at the end. It's entirely up to you. For me, my initial stretch using either the even weighted or the human is all that I need. At this point, before I do any more stretching, I go back into the independent channel value. Local stretch intensity at that point, I bring over about 2/3 of the way and just bump this over ever so slightly. Again, just keeping an eye on the entire image. It's real easy to watch what you're trying to stretch out of your image and forget about your background. So just a little bit at a time, and then it defaults usually to about the first third on the local stretch. So I'll leave it sit there. And again, just start stretching, keeping an eye on the image, making sure I'm not overdoing it for anything. Hit apply when you're happy. And then check my histogram again. I can see that the histogram is slid over to the right again. So again, bring that black point over just a little bit. Keeping an eye on our clipping. Again, something that small is not going to be that big of a deal. And then back to generalized hyperbolic. And at this point, I start playing with setting my symmetry point and doing some small incremental stretches to try to bring out more detail, more contrast. You can just click on the histogram. And if you watch my symmetry point as I do so, if I click over here, it sets it. If I click up here, bringing it back down. What I found, for me anyways, it's easier to come into the image itself and draw a selection point around the area that I want to focus on. So for me, I'll try to get like a dimmer area of the object, draw my selection box around it, and then use my eyedropper tool. Just simply click it, and you can see the slider went over. So it has set my symmetry point based on the selection box. And then just give it little incremental stretches. Hit apply. Your symmetry point will reset after you hit apply. So hit your eyedropper again. And a little bit more of a stretch. And we'll just do that as many times as we feel necessary, just to try to pull out some more brightness and detail around the edge of the galaxy. So I think that looks good. And I'm going to do the same thing for the core, which is generally the brightest area of an image like this. Draw my selection box around it, hit my eyedropper tool, and then again a stretch. And what you'll notice here when you grab the brightest part of your image and the symmetry point is so far over like this, if you watch your histogram, it's going to start moving the histogram over to the left as well. So keep that in mind. It's darkening your background, your image as well, but this is what's kind of pulling everything closer together. Hit apply when you're happy with that. Again, using the same selection box for our symmetry point, hit my eyedropper tool, and then I'll stretch it a little bit more than I probably should, but then manually move my local stretch intensity. And this is what you can end up getting some more contrast in your image. Again, it's just a trial and error thing, right? See what you like best from one side to the other. I like to, again, keep an eye on the edge of the galaxy to make sure that I'm not losing any of that data. I don't want to do it so much that it starts muting it down and it's no longer visible. So I think that looks good. We'll hit apply. Maybe run through it one more time just to see if we can pull anything more out of it. All right. I think that looks good. So at this point, we're done stretching. So close GHS, and now we're going to go into Photoshop. So we're going to come over to our little Save As button, and we're going to save this as a TIFF. By default, it'll take the file name of the file that you had open and use that for the TIFF file, which is fine. So I'm going to click Save. We want to be 16-bit because Camera Raw in Photoshop requires 16-bit. Hit Save, and then we'll open this up in Photoshop. So there's our TIFF right there. I'm just going to double-click it, So it brings it up in Photoshop for me. Now, the first thing that I generally do with all my images, not just the galaxies, is come over into the image menu, and under adjustments, I go into my levels and I just check my levels. You can leave it on RGB. What I'm looking for is if this arrow is sitting at the point where the data starts, or if there's blank areas in there, right? So similar to what we were doing during GHS and we were moving everything back over to the left, this is just a second check before I start doing anything else in Photoshop. What I generally do is not go into RGB, but I'll look at each individual channel. So the red channel, and you can see that moved over just a little bit. It probably doesn't need to bump up too much, but we'll set that to 1. Take a look at the green. Green looks good. Blue looks good as well. So not too much needs to be done in here, but we did adjust the red channel by 1. Click OK, and we'll jump into camera raw now. So under filter and then camera raw filter. So I generally start over in the lights. See if I can give it just a little bit of contrast. You don't want to go crazy with any of this stuff. If you put too much contrast, again, you know, keeping an eye on the edge of the galaxies here, if I start cranking up my contrast, I'm losing it, right? We don't want to do that. So just a little bit of contrast. And by the way, if you're not familiar, if you came all the way over like this and you wanted to reset this back to 0 quickly, you can just double click on the triangle and it'll go back to 0 for you. So, but again, we'll just a little bit of contrast in this. And then our highlights, our shadows, again, you know, go one way or the other so you can get a feel for what this tool is actually doing. You can see as I'm bringing up the shadows, it is also bringing up the faint areas around the galaxy for me. Whites, same thing, go one way or the other to get an idea where you're at. We don't want to go too much because we're going to start blowing out that core, but just give it a little bit of a bump, whatever your liking is. Same thing with the blacks. Just wiggle it back and forth till you find what you like. So next we'll go into color, and you can bump up your vibrance and your saturation. You got to be careful. It's real easy to overdo, and then it starts just looking way overcooked, at least in my opinion. But again, if that's what you like, don't let nobody tell you that it's wrong. So I am just going to play with my vibrance a little bit to see if we can't just get a little bit more of a, not so much more color, but vibrance, like it says, right? It kind of lets the colors in the middle, the oranges and the reds and magentas kind of blend together a little bit more evenly, I think. So you can do saturation too. I usually don't mess with it because it tends to just do too much. So I just, with this one specifically, we're just going to bump up the vibrance. Then into effects, start with the clarity. And again, just like everything, if we go all the way to the right, that's way too much. That's way, it's looking crunchy and fake. Just a little bit. Just watch the image. You know, kind of sharpen it up for you a little bit. You can even try adding a little bit of texture to it. Again, not too much. Dehaze, depending on your data, can help bring out some more detail around the edges, but you got to be careful with this one as well. I'm actually going to pull this down a little bit. And then we can go over into our color mixer. And if need be, you don't have to, but I usually start with a little bit of luminance if I feel that I need to. And instead of playing with the sliders, I come over here to the targeted adjustment tool. So if I click on that, now I've got a little circle, and whatever pixels are falling within that circle, you can see the colored indicators to the right are showing me what colors I'm going to be messing with the luminance on. So if I were to come over in this area here and just try to find colors that would be affected by it, and I left mouse button click down and drag left and right, you can see the effect that it has on there. And if you look over on the luminance column over on the right hand side, you can see the sliders that it's affecting as you're doing this. So I find that to be a better way to try to determine where you want to work on there instead of randomly picking the colors that you think you might be picking to make these adjustments and stuff. Again, it's just a preference thing. So maybe we'll come down over in this area, and I think that looks pretty good. You could do the same thing with saturation. Like I said, I usually don't mess with the saturation too much because it tends to overcook it, but doing it this way can actually bring it down for you as well. For some reason, didn't look correct to begin with, but like I said, I'm going to reset that. We adjusted the luminance on the oranges and the yellows. I like that. So we're just going to hit okay. There's our final image, and just come up and say file and save. So it saves that TIFF file for us. At that point, we can close Photoshop. I'll come back over into Siril and open up that TIFF file. Now we're at the point where we want to start adding the stars back in. Before we do that, the star recomposition tool does not support TIFF files. So we're going to have to save this back as a fit file. So again, come up to our save the current image button. Make sure we're set to fit. Otherwise, you'd have to type the fit extension yourself, which is fine. At this point, I just give it the name of the object, so M106, 32-bit floating point, and hit save. Now we're ready to put the stars back in. So image processing, star processing, and then our star recomposition tool. And we are going to take this image and open it up on the left side of this dialog box. So click where it says none, select my M106, it'll open it up. And then over on the star stretch parameter side on the right, click on the box that says none and look for your star mass. Those are our stars that we removed with the StarNet tool. Open that up. You can go ahead and start stretching your stars in at this point, but again, I always come into advanced so I can change my color stretch model and go into human or even weighted. Again, that tends to preserve the colors of the stars when you're stretching them. If it's left on independent, then your stars will come in just white, which is fine. Again, preference. So even weighted for the stars, modified arc sign, and I'm just going to start stretching them in. And you can go as far as you want. Again, we go all the way over to the right. We'll really bring everything in beyond where they're at to begin with. I tend to dial them back a little bit, make the star the show, the DSO that you took an image of. Once you're happy, click apply. You can also make additional adjustments to the galaxy if need be. This is GHS again over here on the left hand side that you're stretching with. So if you wanted to tweak things a little bit more, you can absolutely do that. I'm happy with the way this looks right now. We've stretched the stars in and hit apply and hit close. So, I mean, that's our final image. As always, you can come over here and do an export right out of Siril as a ping or a JPEG, whichever you want. At this point, I would just call this my M106 final, just to show you. There it is. We'll just open it up in photos real quick. So that's our final processed image. So I hope that was helpful for you guys, especially the ones that have asked for this video. It makes it a lot easier for me when I do it that way, especially with ticking on that color stretch model to be human or even weighted. It works pretty well every time I've tried it. Again, with the issues that I showed you with GraXpert, if anybody knows what's going on with it, has any solutions, please let me know in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. I also want to take this opportunity to say thanks to all my members here on YouTube and on buymeacoffee.com. I appreciate everybody's support. Thank you to everybody that watches the videos, shares them, subscribes, likes them. It all helps the algorithm push my videos out to even more people. This has been a lot of fun doing this with you guys. This channel exists because of all of you. So that's a wrap for this video. We'll see you next time around, and clear skies.